You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley. And once again, we have it's not really your birthday, it's your birthday month. Your birthday was last week, but yes, the birthday girl, Cassandra.
All month long celebration.
Yeah, that's what you said last time. But anyhow, we're happy to have you. It's always a pleasure having you on here. I'm sure the listeners, as I say every time, probably get tired of hearing only me. So you probably ask questions that I don't think about.
Absolutely, because I think about it from a laywoman's terms.
Yes, but you also know a lot more about mold than most people do too. But it always helps to have you here. So anyhow, today is episode 243, and the topic is black mold and vacuums. So what do you think a vacuum has to do with mold?
I have no idea, but I still don't understand how some people will spend thousands on a vacuum, a Dyson. I don't know. I've never done that, but I'm just like, why? Why would you spend $5,000? You've bought an expensive vacuum.
I was going to say, we have a very expensive one.
I was going to say, I like $100.
Well, the reason why, and you hear me say this all the time, you get what you pay for. But actually, the reason I bought that was some salesman came to my door. And he got like a black light out. I mean, he had his sales pitch down. And at the time, one of my kids, he thought he had asthma. And so the salesman was selling a canister vacuum and air purifiers. And of course, I was a mold guy back then. This has been a long time ago. But he talked me into buying 2 air purifiers, which we use, and then that vacuum. And it was a lot. It was not the smartest purchase, probably. But I'm sure he made a lot of money off of me.
Well, but that brings us back to that black mold and vacuum. I mean, dust collection, air that isn't great, all of that contributes and helps and assists mold just become bigger, right?
Yeah, so, the black light presentation he gave me, it was kind of interesting because, some mold professionals, and I say some, we don't, but there are mold professionals out there that use black lights because they think they can see the mold with it. I'm not saying they think, meaning they can't. I'm sure you can, but it's just not something we use. But let's just say that in our house, we only have rugs. It's all LVP flooring. But let's say in a normal home, you had carpet. We've talked about a mold concern in the corner of a bathroom because usually it's probably the man, the husband, throws his wet towels there, and there's mold growing in that carpet. Well, if you're just using a $100 vacuum and you're vacuuming and there's mold in the carpet, you're actually spreading spores around. Did you realize that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so, once you disturb that, your vacuum, not everything's going to go into, back in the day, Kirby vacuums. That's what I grew up with. You remember those? Those
No.
really heavy.
No.
I think they were more expensive kind of vacuums. What I remember the most is they were very, very heavy. And you had to put belts on them, and they took these bags that you had to put in them. Anyhow, they were high quality vacuums, but they had a bagging system. So if you have a $100 vacuum, like we use for our rugs, it's just one of those canisters that you just empty out. And we bought ours, obviously, for dog hair. But anyhow, if it doesn't get the mold spores in there, where do you think the mold spores are going?
I don't know. Well, they're in the air, right?
Well, you're vacuuming the carpet if there's mold in the carpet, so you're stirring them up.
Yeah, you're stirring them up, and then they just find other homes
exactly
within your house, whether it's on your couch or anything that's a cellulose material.
Yep. Then that home could be in your body, in your lungs.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I didn't even think of that.
If we were to vacuum with our HEPA vacuums, then it would actually get all those mold spores in the bagging system. So that's why, I just wanted, and our listeners know we do a podcast every week. I've had people say to me, well, don't you run out of stuff to talk about? Well, we repeat a lot of things, but on the other hand, nothing's exactly the same. And so that's why I thought vacuums would be something that's kind of important, because if you have a mold concern, you're literally kicking up mold spores while you're vacuuming. If you just use a normal vacuum, you're probably literally making yourself sick.
Is this also where it's not good to be OCD about cleaning? Like, you and I are not OCD cleaners, but I know a lot of them who they pick up everything of dust. They have a duster. They make people take their shoes off at the door. They're always sweeping. But if you're always doing that without opening the doors and the windows, aren't you just kicking up, if you've got toxic mold in your home, aren't you just kicking that up and spreading it around and helping it to grow in other places?
Absolutely. When we've talked about it, and I don't want to say to people that are OCD about cleaning that, that's a bad thing. I mean, whatever works for our listeners works. But we've talked about how in the past, and we tease around, that we used to eat dirt,
Exactly.
Not literally, but we didn't have bottled water. We drank out of the garden hose. We didn't have hand sanitizers.
Which helped us build immunity to
exactly.
things.
And so, in my opinion, I do believe that I feel this way with COVID, that people that were so OCD about cleaning and sanitized everything all the time, your body can't build up an immunity to much. No. And obviously I'm not a doctor or scientist, but that's just how I view it. And going back to what your question is, if you have mold concerns and you are OCD, like, you could be spreading those mold spores all over, or, let's say that they're not spreading too much, but if you're the one cleaning it, and let's just say you seem to get sick, or you have a mold sensitivity, or you have an autoimmune disorder, every time you're cleaning all the time, you're kind of just making yourself sick, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so I guess my question then would be, because I know people who tend to be OCD about cleaning, they can't be in a house where they're not doing that. So what is the solution for those people when it comes to not kicking up the mold?
Well, you would have, to be kicking up the mold spores. Now, just to kind of, because it's very complicated. Mold spores are naturally present, so they're going to be in the air, they're airborne. Mold infestations are not. So going back to my analogy with the mold in the carpet, like, you're kicking up mold spores. Once there's an infestation in mold growth, those are mold types that are not naturally present because you have wet building materials. So wet carpet, wet padding, wet wood. That's why it's a concern. So just to address that with our listeners, because they're like, well, walking around, or my dog walking around, could kick up mold spores. When I talked about the whole vacuum thing, I'm being specific to a mold infestation that is not visible. How do you address that? Well, for the situation I just explained, that would require a mold mitigation company to get involved.
But would you suggest that people who may or may not know whether or not they have a toxic mold infestation issue, if they are OCD about cleaning, that they have a HEPA vacuum? Yes. And that they're cleaning in general, how often, however, that they're using a HEPA vacuum because they may not know that there is toxic mold.
Exactly. And that's kind of my point with the whole vacuums is mold spores have to be removed. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about mold infestations. So going back to the carpet analogy, they have to be removed, those mold spores. Can a carpet cleaner vacuum up those mold spores, chem dry, whatever companies are out there? They have different methods. They could, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, you have to remove that carpet, remove that pad. Obviously, it has to be done by a professional. But it's difficult to kind of know what everybody else's cleaning habits are, if there's any mold in their homes. But going back to your specific question, yes, a HEPA vacuum would be very beneficial because it is a HEPA vacuum. And to just explain to our listeners, they're probably like, what's the difference between my little Kirby vacuum or my $100 vacuum, Dyson, whatever brands there are? What's the difference between that and a HEPA vacuum? At the end of the day, it's all about the filtration system on it.
Okay.
So our HEPA vacuums, they're certified HEPA vacuums that we use for mold mitigation. You've seen me bring it into the house once in a while, but for the most part, I don't. But they actually have, and I think it's like 3 different stages of filtration. It has a high particulate bag on it, has its normal bag, and then it actually has a HEPA filter on the exhaust. Because that's what happens if you think about, if you're vacuuming and you have mold spores in the carpet, it's coming, obviously it's getting kicked up by the brushes or the vacuum itself, and then when it goes through the exhaust, the air has to come out somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's kicking mold spores out that exhaust. Well, our HEPA vacuums actually have filters on those exhausts.
Yeah.
So it's very, I'm not going to say high tech, it's just more complex than a normal vacuum. So going back to your question, yes, having a HEPA vacuum for our listeners is never a bad idea.
Okay.
And, if you don't have a HEPA vacuum, you see me use the shop vacuum quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's because we don't have carpet. The shop vacuums can have bags that you put in them. So there are things you can do, like put bags in so that you don't expose yourself.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So, and to go back to the people who are OCD cleaners, I've heard you say that routine cleaning, routine checking is important to mold prevention. So it's not that cleaning is a bad thing.
No.
It actually is a good thing. It's just if you don't know there's a mold infestation and you're constantly, agitating those things.
Stirring up the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind too, like I said earlier, I don't know people's cleaning habits. Some people, like when they go to mop a floor, they're not worried about water because they're like, well, this is tile. It doesn't hurt anything. And my point is they could be saturating the floor and it might not hurt the tiles, but maybe it's getting into the baseboard.
Okay.
If, they're, like I said, kind of overkill, if that makes sense with the water.
Yeah.
But, for the most part, people would say, well, how would I know if there's a mold infestation while I'm cleaning? Once again, water stains, things like that. Their habits, which we talked about with mold prevention, there are things they can do to prevent, obviously, mold infestations. And so I'm not saying don't clean all the time, don't be OCD, but keep in mind that there are things that you could be doing that could be kicking up those mold spores that normally aren't kicked up in the air.
Exactly.
And the way you would notice that is if you, every time, and for the most part, most men poo-poo mold away anyways, but for the women, if they pay more attention to things, whoever's cleaning, that doesn't matter. But if you notice you're sick after you've been, vacuuming the house, maybe that's telling us, hey, there could be something going on. Doesn't mean it's in the carpets, but it could be, behind a wall or whatnot.
That makes sense. So when it comes to a vacuum, should people spend way more money on the vacuum from your perspective in terms of preventing mold, or can you get a Dirt Devil for $100 and it's fine?
I personally would, and it's easy for me to say because we use HEPA vacuums, I would spend more money and buy the HEPA vacuum. And I can't remember exactly what the price is for the vacuums we use, but they're not $100. They're $600.
Okay.
But it's something you can trust more. Now, I'm not telling our listeners to go out and get rid of their Dyson vacuums, but it's just something that I wanted to talk about and keep in mind that, it's worth it to have a HEPA vacuum. It's worth it to have a shop vacuum in case you ever have a moisture intrusion event. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying run out and buy a HEPA vacuum, but keep in mind that it is out there and there's options. And we talked about it last week or the week before. We will get a Amazon affiliate list on the website, correct?
Yes, we will.
And it'll have a HEPA vacuum that I prefer to use in there.
Exactly. Yes, it will.
So it's just something, like I said, I just wanted to talk about it just because, we don't talk about vacuums and mold. And I wanted to just emphasize, too, mold spores infestations have to be removed.
Yes.
And that's how we do it, is with vacuums.
Absolutely.
Clear as mud?
Clear as mud. Do you prefer vacuums that have bags like the old school ones, or the ones like we have with their... That doesn't have a bag, does it?
Ours doesn't, no.
Yeah, that tells you how often I vacuum people. I don't. So...
But like, just for our listeners so they know, ours just has a canister. There's a filter in it.
Yeah. But what's better from a mold expert's perspective? And we have one that doesn't have a bag. Because it only costs $98. I think it was $105
right,
with
but we
taxes.
purchased ours for dog hair.
Yes, on Amazon.
Yes.
We'll put that one on the link in case you have dogs and issues with hair.
Yeah, it works great for that.
It does.
But on the other hand, for our listeners, like, we don't have mold concerns in our house. And if we did, I know the right guy to test.
Well, and you also have an expensive vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a HEPA like, we have a number of vacuums, not just one.
Yep.
So what you're suggesting for people is definitely have a HEPA vacuum if possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to have a regular vacuum, choose one that comes in bags so you remove the stuff out, right? No?
A lot of people, those aren't, I don't want to say they're a thing of the past, but I don't think vacuums with bags are very common these days.
I haven't really seen them, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just something to think about for our listeners. You could be stirring up the mold if you have mold in your carpets and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you're always using your duster, if you're always using a broom, if you're always if you're kicking up dust and you're not super clear on mold levels and things going on mold-wise in your home.
Yep.
It's just something to think about.
Yeah, if you think you have a mold concern in your home, you need to obviously just get a professional in there, because cleaning and, I hear it all the time, like, I'm going to do a deep clean and I'm going to ozone it, or I'm going to do a mold bomb. There's all sorts of, I don't want to use the wrong words and I'm about cursed, but they use things that are really just BS.
Yeah.
Like, a mold bomb's not going to fix your mold problem. You need to get a mold specialist in there.
Yeah.
So, I have 5 books, right? You would think I would know how many I have. So. But I have 5 books. So for you listeners that are newer to this podcast, I have 5 books that are available on Amazon. I cover lots of different things mold-wise. So go to Amazon. I'll actually put a link in the description of this podcast. Did you have anything else you wanted to throw in there about vacuums and mold?
No, I think it's just important to stay tuned and go to cnccontractorservices.com. And if you're not on the email list, make sure you get on the email list, because that's how you'll find out when new books are coming, when new digital products are coming.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a book I think I've been working on for a long time that I'm supposed to
excited. It's a really good one, too.
What is it?
Case studies, remember?
No, I think we have the case studies already done.
Oh, then it's the one on tips.
Yeah, 50 ways or something.
For tips for mold prevention.
Yeah.
Because very often the cause of mold problems is actually the daily habits of the people living in the home.
Yeah, you would think I would know which book I'm working on, but I can't remember the last time I even opened that file on my computer. So we're just trying to do YouTube stuff and
And that's why you want to be on the email list, because whether it's the launch of a YouTube channel that's coming up in 2024, or it's the release of a new book, or the release of a digital product, the fastest way and the first way you're going to hear about it is actually on that email list.
Yes, exactly. All right, perfect. So now you've heard it from myself and Cassandra. This is episode 243. Hope all of you are doing great so far this year. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.